Okay, so we've talked about the nervous system and we've talked about how it is basically split up into the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and then the peripheral nervous system, which is how it branches out to the rest of the body from the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so if that's the brain and the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system branches out from that. Okay, so it's everything outside the brain and spinal cord, basically. It's divided into two sections, really. There's the autonomic, which happens without our conscious control, and then there's the somatic motor division, and that's really just control of your muscles. That's conscious. Okay, um, and this would be subconscious. All right. So we're going to talk about both of these things, and we're gonna later split actually in the next slide and show how the autonomic division is divided into parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay, so that's what this whole thing is going to be about. So I kind of want you to try to keep that straight. The difference between the CNS, which we're not talking about right now because that's just the brain and spinal cord, but we're talking about divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so and those divisions are the autonomic and the somatic. So this is the other thing that's very important. So we're talking about autonomic. Those are things we don't have control over. That's divided into these two sections, which are the sympathetic, and we know what the sympathetic nervous system is because we experience it. It's fight or flight. It's when you have an adrenaline rush or adrenaline is released. Adrenaline, of course, is epinephrine. And then the parasympathetic is rest and digest. Okay, so these guys are, I guess you would say they're antagonistic of each other. One does one thing, makes you, uptight when somebody, pulls in front of you really quickly on the road, and the other one is when you're relaxed, when you're, sitting on your sofa and everything is just kind of cool. All right, so what these we're gonna start out talking about the autonomic nervous system. And what that does is it controls smooth muscle. Now, smooth muscle is something you don't have conscious control over, so it fits that criterion. No, it's automatic. And also cardiac glands. You can't just decide you want to squirt sweat out of your glands. That's actually something that's controlled by this autonomic nervous system. Lymph activities, adipose, so fats, are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So what happens to adipose tissue, whether you add fat or whether you take fat away, that's controlled through the autonomic system. Okay, so smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, adipose tissue, lymphoid tissue, and we say that it's mostly involuntary. Now you can activate or unactivate, if that's a term, the autonomic nervous system or the branches of the autonomic nervous system by thinking about various things, but you don't really control it in a direct way. You can't tell your heart to beat and then stop beating. You can think of something that causes it to beat faster, or you can try to reach your zen and cause it to beat slower. Okay. It works with the autonomic nervous system, also works with the endocrine system, which we've talked about a little bit, and behavioral state. So our certain behaviors that are changed, but not in the direct way that the somatic nervous system works, and that is by controlling actual skeletal muscles. Okay, so certain behaviors can be changed, whether you're motivated to do something, and that can be done through the autonomic nervous system. But actually deciding to, flex a muscle, that's actually somatic. So these are two divisions of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so hopefully you understand that because it's pretty important. Um, so if we start out, we're going to talk about the somatic later, but if we start out with the autonomic nervous system, like I said, it's divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. And these guys, as the names sort of imply, these guys sort of work together. When you're being chased by a snake up a teeter-totter, you tend to have your sympathetic nervous system activated, and if you're just rest and digest, it's your parasympathetic. But really, we're sort of in a balance all the time. We hardly ever have one completely activated without the other also being activated. And what that means from a neurochemical perspective is that you're always releasing a little bit of norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are sympathetic. So epi and norepi. Norepi would be neuronal, and that's released from neurons. Epinephrine would be released from the adrenal gland, right? Adrenaline. Okay. So, and that's more of a hormone. Acts more of as a hormone. Okay, but anyway, these guys are always, there's always some of that being released even when you're completely relaxed. And this one is releasing acetylcholine, which we abbreviate like that, acetylcholine. And that's the primary neurotransmitter for the parasympathetic. So you're always releasing some of that too. So you're kind of in in limbo all the time. One side's a little more active than others. Depends on the time of day sometimes, and exactly what's going on in your life. Okay. So overall, I want to say this. It's primarily controlled by the hypothalamus. So when you have a thought or something like that, it might go through the hypothalamus, which is this whole area here, and then that can send a signal to other areas. So they might synapse with that, and then it will go out to the periphery. So the CNS control of it is actually here in the hypothalamus primarily, and there are other little brain regions, but these then communicate and have their effect in the periphery. Okay. So that's why it's part of the peripheral nervous system. Everything is going to ultimately, not everything, but most things ultimately have control by the brain, which is the CNS. And so it's the hypothalamus in this case that is mainly controlling the autonomic nervous system. So it's telling it to either get you excited or to tell you to just kind of chill. Okay, so we can see a couple of different areas of the pons and the medulla, the urinary bladder, respiratory center, blood pressure control, respiratory center. There are two. These guys work together. One tells you how fast to breathe. One tells you how deeply to breathe. And all of those things kind of work together, and they're all controlled primarily by, like I said, by the hypothalamus. Okay. All right. So let's start out talking about the parasympathetic branch. Remember, that's rest and digest. Okay. And like I said, the main neurotransmitter that's going to be released is acetylcholine. So if we ask a question, we say, okay, I understand rest and digest. I know how to rest, and I my body knows how to digest. But what exactly does all of this mean? Well, let's think of one little example. Let's say, okay, if you are resting and digesting, what's your heart doing? Is it going slower or is it going faster? Well, I think it's pretty clear that your heart would be, this is the heart because it has the atria and the ventricles, that your heart would be pumping slower. Okay? All right, so that means that at some point, this is a neuron coming from, actually it's coming from what's called the vagus nerve, and it's going to be releasing acetylcholine onto the heart, specifically onto this little area called the SA node and the AV node. And so that's what's going on. And so you just have to apply this to the rest. You have to say, okay, so when I'm relaxing, what's happening to blood supply to my skeletal muscles? Okay, I'm laying on the sofa. I'm not going anywhere, so I'm going to lower activity to those areas. Okay, so we can kind of see that we just have neural control. We either activate it or we don't activate it. Sometimes the sympathetic and parasympathetic are acting on the same things like blood vessels. Do we want to dilate the blood vessel? Do we want to constrict the blood vessel? Okay, so it all depends on the effect. Now, the thing about acetylcholine is you have muscarinic. There are two different kinds of acetylcholine receptors. One is muscarinic and one is nicotinic. When we talk about the parasympathetic branch, we're talking about this type called muscarinic. And these are G protein. We mentioned G protein a little bit, but they're G protein, which means that they're not just channels. That's basically what that means. That means that it's something that it's a receptor that sits on the outside, and then when the acetylcholine comes and binds, then it will have some kind of an effect inside. Okay, whatever happens to be required of that particular organ or cell or whatever it is. Okay, so that's the second messenger pathway, and there are at least 5 subtypes. We don't have to learn them all, but there are lots of different types of acetylcholine receptors. They're all activated by, obviously, acetylcholine. Okay, so I mentioned the vagus nerve. Now, if we look at this, if you're resting and digesting, you don't need as much air intake. Okay, so you don't need to breathe as heavily. So these might constrict a little more and block a little more airflow. Okay, so that's parasympathetic. Your stomach might be a little more active, so you will stimulate peristalsis. Okay, stimulates bile release. Remember, it's called rest and digest. Bile is we'll talk about that when we talk about the digestive system, but it's a digestive fluid. So that's released. Contracts the bladder, slows the heartbeat. I already mentioned constricts the airflow, so constricts the bronchi, and so stimulates flow of saliva. So you can if you're eating, you can start to break down your food. Constricts the pupils. And that almost makes sense because, if you have an adrenaline rush, your pupils dilate to let in more light and make you much more aware. Okay, so that's the vagus nerve controls a huge amount of this parasympathetic system. Okay, so 75%. So 75% of all parasympathetic fibers are actually from this vagus nerve. And it just exits here from the brainstem, and it runs out, and then it branches to lots of different areas. Now, there are other cranial nerves that are involved for things that are occurring in the face, but primarily we're looking down here in this area. And there's also this little part here, the splenic nerves, that are controlling the bladder, and the ovaries here, the reproductive system. Okay, the ovaries and the penis actually. So it's just not written there. Okay, so sensory information from internal organs to the brain. So this is a two-way street. Okay, so the organs are saying, hey, this is what's going on, and then that's processed in the brain, and the brain responds through the vagus nerve. Okay, this is what you need to do now. For the most part, the digestive system is pretty self-sufficient, but there is certain feedback, okay, that occurs there, and that's the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, and remember the neurotransmitter that's being released primarily is acetylcholine. Okay, so that's really about all we're going to talk about with the parasympathetic control. Okay, so hopefully you understand that big picture idea of, well, we have nerves going to these areas, releasing a molecule and causing them to slow down or speed up. It depends on what we need to have done, and that's a pretty important point. That we have slowing of the heart rate, but we have an increase in smooth muscle contractions of the stomach, because that's what we need when we're resting and digesting. Okay, so that's what we call that. We call that antagonistic control. Well, when we say antagonistic control, that means the parasympathetic is doing one thing, and the sympathetic, I'll just start that over. Sympathetic is doing something else. Okay, and they're having opposite effects. This is saying, hey heart, so if we have the heart here, hey heart, slow down. And this is saying, hey heart, speed up. Okay, that's what we mean in this case by antagonistic. It's not like an antagonist that blocks a receptor. This is actually, one is going one direction, one is going the other direction. Okay, so most internal organs are under antagonistic control. That means you've got one thing, parasympathetic, saying to either slow down or speed up, depending on what it is, and this one's saying to slow down or speed up, but it's going to be different than the parasympathetic. So hopefully that makes sense. So again, one branch is excitatory, the other branch is inhibitory, and this is the example I gave. Okay, sympathetic response, fight or flight, is to increase the heart rate. Parasympathetic is to slow the heart rate. So if we kind of look at this for a lot of different things, and we have here This is sympathetic response in red, and then we have over here the parasympathetic that's in blue, and we can see that pupil of the eye, sympathetic dilates, parasympathetic constricts, and same thing all the way down, increases rate, slows rate. Now, the parasympathetic isn't really responsible for controlling vasoconstriction, vasodilation. That's controlled primarily by the sympathetic response, and it takes care of it pretty good. But everything else you can see, dilation, constriction, decreasing, increasing, decreasing, increasing. Okay, so they're working against each other. Now this column right here is talking about adrenergic receptors. Now we have this identity crisis with the sympathetic nervous system where we call it epinephrine, and in Britain they call it adrenaline. So same molecule, they just have different names in different places. However, we also see that our receptors are called adrenergic based on adrenaline. Okay, so adrenergic receptors bind epinephrine and norepinephrine, but they're called adrenergic. Okay, so just remember that, and there are different ones. So that's why we have this thing where we can release epinephrine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, epinephrine or norepinephrine, and if we activate a certain subtype, alpha adrenergic receptors, it'll constrict the blood vessels. If we activate a different type, beta 2 in this case, we'll dilate them. Okay, and you know, to make this even more relevant, if we look here at the lungs, it also has this beta 2 adrenergic receptor. And you may say, well, gee, why is this all relevant? Why does this matter? Tell me how this matters. Well, if you take an inhaler of a drug called albuterol, okay, which is given to asthmatic patients when they're having an acute attack of asthma, then they can use an inhaler. And basically what albuterol does is it activates this receptor. Well, okay, that's what it does. It's a molecule that mimics norepinephrine. It activates, or epinephrine, and it activates this beta 2 receptor. And what's it going to do? It's going to dilate the bronchioles. It's going to make them larger so you can get more airflow through them. Okay, so that's why all this matters. If you've ever heard of beta blockers, well, if you have a beta blocker, there's your beta 1. It's going to block the beta 1 adrenergic receptor. If you block that, you don't have this increase. You no longer increase heart rate. Your heart rate slows down. Blood pressure medicine. Okay, so it slows the heart by blocking the beta receptors. So your sympathetic nervous system isn't going to increase your heart rate as much. Okay, so this stuff is all very, very relevant. Okay, so if we look at this, now the thing to remember about autonomic is that it has two neurons that control it. So here's the brain spinal cord. Well, this is actually what this would represent, the spinal cord. And it releases, or it has a neuron that comes from it, and it will release acetylcholine for both sympathetic, okay, fight or flight, and parasympathetic. So they look pretty similar here. There's a difference in their length typically between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, but they're both releasing acetylcholine here. Okay, and now I know I just said that the parasympathetic releases acetylcholine, but that's down here. Okay, parasympathetic releases acetylcholine directly onto, that T is for target organ. That's where acetylcholine is being released for the parasympathetic. And over here, the sympathetic is releasing norepinephrine. Okay, so this is neuronal control. So when the hypothalamus says, hey, we need to do whatever, activate the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, it will, when it activates that, it doesn't matter that first little handshake between the first neuron that comes out of the spinal cord and then this ganglion, that's what we call those. then that's going to release acetylcholine just to get the message from here to here. So the body says, acetylcholine works, whatever, it doesn't matter, we're just communicating with another neuron. It opens up a channel, activates this neuron. And then this neuron is the one that's going to make a difference because, like I said, sympathetic, it's going to release norepinephrine. Parasympathetic, it's going to release acetylcholine. Okay, it's a muscarinic receptor. So this is the G protein one. This is a channel. Okay, this is going to make more sense because, and you actually have to know this for the muscle systems as well. But I'm going to mention it a couple of times here. So here we have, and we can almost make a guess on all of these. Now you don't have to know all of these, but my guess is you could probably already figure it out. If you understand that sympathetic is fight or flight, you can already sort of figure out what's going on here. You can say, okay, well, let's see what's going to happen with the liver. Okay? Now, think about if you're being chased by a bear. Do you really need to start producing molecules for the liver or enzymes to break down toxins and to make bile and digestive enzymes? Do you really need to be doing that when you're being chased by a bear? No, you don't. So we have activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Let's see if I can come back here, figure out where this came from. Okay, so we activate it here. It goes up here and it releases, and there's a ganglion. Okay, so the reason we have the ganglions is because sometimes they split like this. And so in this case, it's split. It's going to control all of these in the same way. And then it's going to, so this was our acetylcholine onto a nicotinic receptor. It's just a handshake, hand off the message to this one. This one goes on, and remember, we're talking about sympathetic. And so onto the liver, it's going to release what? It's going to release norepinephrine because we're talking about neurons here. Okay, so we could have figured that out. And so if we say parasympathetic, rest and digest, well, the liver is involved in digestion. Okay, if you didn't know that before, you know it now. And so what do you think it's going to do? Well, it's going to activate it. Now the handshake here takes place right at the liver. That's what I was saying. There is a difference in length. If you look at this one, it's very short. The presynaptic neuron is very short, and the postsynaptic is long. In this one, parasympathetic, the first one tends to be longer, and the second one is very, very short. Okay? All right, so just in case there needs to be branching to go in lots of areas. That way you don't have a whole bunch of neurons going down here. You can just take it all the way to here, and then it can branch and go all over the place. Okay, so I mean, and you can pretty much fill in the gaps with most of these, and you can, slowing heart rate, increasing heart rate. Okay, so it's not hard to understand what's going on. The hard thing is, if you get a question like, does it activate, does it excite, or does it inhibit? Because you might be tempted to say, if I ask a question that says, does the parasympathetic inhibit or excite a neuron, and I give you a few choices, and one of those choices would be, well, it could do either one. It could either excite or it could inhibit. Because, in one way it's constricting airways, and in another way it's increasing bile secretion over here. Okay, so remember that. Now, when we look at how it actually happens, this is just kind of interesting. It gives you a better picture of what's going on. Remember, when it's causing your airways to constrict, we have a neuron going down there, and that thing is dividing, and it's branching, and it's going all over, and there are these little things, they call them varicosities, and they're just dotted all over the smooth muscle. And when they're activated, they just release, and the only thing that's really important about this is that you can see that these things are spread all over the smooth muscle, and they just release norepinephrine, and there are receptors for it, and it causes that to do whatever it is that needs to be done. It depends on what kind of adrenergic receptor it is. Remember, we had the alphas, we had the betas. It might cause it to relax in one case, or it might cause it to constrict in another case. It all depends on what's needed at that particular place. Okay, now that's neuronal control. We also have endocrine control. Okay, so that's where we talk about epinephrine. Ooh, an adrenaline rush. Well, adrenaline, epinephrine, is primarily released from the adrenal gland. Nice name, right? Adrenal gland, adrenaline. All you have to do is remember adrenaline equals epinephrine. Okay, so if when the sympathetic, remember we're still talking about sympathetic nervous system or neurons are activated, then you can release this epinephrine from primary hormone is epinephrine. You release that into the blood. Well, when you release it into the blood, it goes everywhere. So it's going to get to the lungs. It's going to get everywhere. Uh, and it's going to have an effect on all of the organs. So if you don't know what the adrenal gland, it sits just like a little hat, kind of an ugly hat, sits right on the kidneys right there. So that little blob right there, that's the adrenal gland. Okay, and it's released from the center of it, which is the adrenal medulla, which is nervous tissue. And so there are little neurons, modified neurons in there that produce epinephrine. And when you say activate the adrenal gland, it's going to be, of course, the first thing is going to be acetylcholine to say activate. And then epinephrine will be released all through the body. Okay, so it's going to go everywhere. Everywhere there's an epinephrine or an adrenergic receptor, it's going to find it because it's all over the body at this point. Then you're going to feel that big surge of adrenaline. Okay, so if we summarize here, just remember first guy up is this acetylcholine, and it's a nicotinic receptor, which means it opens an ion channel. Okay, so hopefully you know what that means, but in general, what this means is that it lets sodium into the cell and immediately depolarizes. Okay, so it's very faithful, it's very fast. Okay, so that's why it's that a nicotinic receptor. And yes, it was named after nicotine because nicotine will activate those directly. Okay, and then the difference is, in addition to this length that I had talked about, the difference is that parasympathetic releases acetylcholine, sympathetic releases norepinephrine when we're talking about nerves. When we're talking about the adrenal gland, again, same thing, releases acetylcholine, and then it releases epinephrine. Okay, so differences, really, if you just remember they all release acetylcholine onto nicotinic receptors at first because they're fast. The only differences are the parasympathetic is going to release acetylcholine, the sympathetic releases norepinephrine, and from the adrenal gland, it releases epinephrine. And those are the primary differences. It doesn't have to be that confusing. Now, does your body control it, individually? Yes, it can. The hypothalamus can activate the sympathetic nervous system and hit some of these things without necessarily activating the adrenal glands. But it can hit them all at the same time. And they're always kind of off and on, and they go to their respective organs. There isn't too much control because chances are when you activate the sympathetic nervous system, you're going to activate all of it. Okay, so in general, you're activating everything. Same with the parasympathetic, and they're constantly kind of going all at the same time, a little on, a little off. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Because now we're going to move on to somatic. Okay, somatic versus what? What we just talked about, autonomic. Okay, so hopefully the autonomic is clear. Sympathetic, and parasympathetic. Horrible writing. Sympathetic and parasympathetic, that's autonomic. Both of these, to keep you oriented, are part of the peripheral nervous system. The autonomic and the somatic, both part of the peripheral nervous system. This one just has these two things going that are doing the opposite. One is getting you excited and one is helping you kind of chill a little bit. Okay, so somatic nervous system, it is very direct. We don't have to think about two different neurons. Okay, it's just one neuron. Sympathetic nervous system, here's the spinal cord. So this is the spinal cord. There's a neuron that exits it, goes to the muscle, and releases acetylcholine onto a nicotinic receptor. Okay, easy. All right. And this is going to matter because what are we trying to do here? We're trying to activate skeletal muscle. When we say skeletal muscle, we mean, we mean conscious control. Okay, we're aware of it. We have made this decision. Our motor cortex has said, hey, we're going to flex our bicep muscle. Sends a signal down, says, hey, you, flex the bicep muscle. This guy goes, okay. Sends a signal, releases acetylcholine, binds to a receptor, and this will flex every time. There is no decision to be made like we saw with the brain. Sometimes the brain, it has to reach threshold. This hits threshold every time. Okay, it's very faithful in that respect. Okay, so somatic, remember, we're in the PNS, divided into autonomic and somatic. Autonomic, of course, is divided into parasympathetic and sympathetic. Okay, so somatic, number of neurons in the path, 1. Autonomic, remember, there were 2. The first one released acetylcholine onto nicotinic receptors. The second one either released norepinephrine or acetylcholine, and the acetylcholine for parasympathetic was muscarinic, which are the G proteins. They're a little bit slower, but a lot of times that's okay. When you're causing a smooth muscle to constrict, you don't care that it's slow because it's going to last a while anyway. Okay, so this one's always acetylcholine onto nicotinic. This one, when you're talking about at the organ, it's always acetylcholine for parasympathetic. It's always acetylcholine onto muscarinic. Sympathetic, it's always going to be norepinephrine. Okay, and it will bind these subtypes of the adrenaline or adrenergic receptors. Somatic, it's always onto skeletal muscle. This one can be in any of these things: endocrine tissue, smooth muscle, adipose tissue, any of those things. This is always going to be released from an axon terminal. Remember we talked about those varicosities, or it could be released in axon terminals for the autonomic. This is always going to be excitatory. I mean, think about this. We're talking about contracting a muscle. All of these things kind of fit. Well, once you remember that it's acetylcholine onto nicotinic receptors, it all seems to fit. Skeletal muscle, axon terminals, it's the outside or peripheral components are always going to be axons. That's how it's going to travel. It's a little more complicated. Preganglionic, post, and then there's a ganglion, and then there's postganglionic. Things that we're not too concerned about right now. But that's because you've got multiple neurons, pre, post, and then you have this ganglion where there's a bunch of cell bodies. Okay, that's what a ganglion is. It's called a nucleus in the brain, but it's a bunch of cell bodies with neurons coming out of it. Okay, so we call that big group a ganglion. So these guys are moving into it, and a bunch of cell bodies, ganglia, and then postganglionic. So summary of function, moving. Okay, summary of function of the autonomic nervous system, lots of things. Visceral function, which means organs, internal organ secretion, control of metabolism. It does all kinds of stuff. That stuff's constantly going on in you all the time. And you can't really survive without it going on. Any malfunctions can cause some serious problems. Okay, so again, staying with somatic now. From the spinal cord, we have said, hey muscle, I want you to contract. Okay, so the brain has said, I want this muscle to contract, this one right here. And so it sends a signal out, and remember, the thicker a neuron is, the faster. Okay, so these guys, these motor neurons, tend to be pretty big. They're pretty large, and they're always myelinated because we want to get that signal there very quickly. Okay, so this is the neuromuscular junction, right? Makes sense. Here's the neuron, here's the muscle, there's the junction. So the neuromuscular junction. Where do you think acetylcholine is going to be released? It's going to be released from right here, and that's where the receptors are. Okay, and so we're going to go on in the muscle section. We're going to talk about how the muscle works, but we need to know that it is definitely acetylcholine being released. So here it is. Here's the terminal, the axon terminal. There is your acetylcholine being released onto this little area right here, and then that's going to cause the muscle to contract. If we blow it up and we look a little more closely, we can see, again, here's the acetylcholine in all of these guys. Here are the nicotinic receptors. the acetylcholine is released, which is what this picture shows. So if we get our orientation again, here's the acetylcholine in the synaptic vesicles. It's released and it binds to the nicotinic receptors. Two have to bind to each one, and then it causes sodium to move into the cells, because that's what nicotinic receptors do. They open a channel and they let sodium in. They also let potassium move, but sodium wants to do it much more, so we usually just focus on the fact that sodium is moving in. Okay, and then when we cover muscles, we're going to say what happens next. Okay, so that's going to be part of the muscle system, and that's what you're going to have to know. So we're kind of following this whole thing from beginning until you lift your arm or whatever it is you have to do. Okay, that's it for this section.